Hello, and today I am very delighted to be joined by Emma Nash. Emma is a solicitor and head of the family department at city law firm Fletcher. In addition, Emma writes and speaks extensively on family law issues, as I think lots of us do who work in the divorce space. I think we get all drawn into it. But Emma is also the founder of the Family Law Language Project, which is an initiative that launched in November 2021. And the aim of it is to make family law more accessible and reduce conflict by improving the understanding and the use of language, which is what hopefully we're going to talk a little bit more about today, because that fits in well with everything that Smart Divorce and the Smart Divorce podcast are trying to do. So Emma, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for responding to my random fancy coming on my podcast message. It was really good. I'm fascinated by the Family Law Language Project. Would you give us a little bit of background as to how it started?
Absolutely. I think it sort of starts from two places. First was the Family Solutions Group, which I think most people in family law know is a subgroup of the private law working group, who were basically given the rather mammoth task of trying to work out how to make family law better. And they came out with a report called What About Me in 2020. And they identified many problems with the current system and made many recommendations. One of the problems they identified was the use of language and the misuse of language. And that was across the board in the media and in the profession, and misunderstandings by the public, and those being reinforced, and then a use of language that was archaic, alienating, too technical, or it was actually increasing parental conflict. And they sort of thought, well, they made some recommendations about what could be done about that, which included some sort of wide sweeping ideas about sort of re-education of the public. But around about the same time, I think just before this report came out, I had done an article for the Times having a bit of a grumble about some of the words that were commonly misused or misunderstood in family law. And they picked up on this, and they sort of came to me and said, oh, you've already done a bit of thinking about this. Do you want to take that further? And we had a couple of meetings, and I started thinking, and that turned into a committee of people coming together with the idea of, let's create a platform that's accessible, that's there for everyone, that will help identify this misuse of language, that will help identify language that isn't appropriate, and will inform and educate people about what is better language, what is the correct language, but also provide a space for everyone to understand people's different experiences of language. I think that bit's really important when you're coming to this as a lawyer. Your experience of family law language is very different from someone who's actually needs to use the system, particularly the young people in it. And let's face it, you mentioned, we all write about family law. Yes, we're lawyers, or we're not all lawyers, but we're in that space and we kind of live and breathe it. But that system is not there for us. Yeah. And if people who are using it aren't understanding it, are feeling alienated, or the language is making that experience worse for them, we have to listen to them, and we have to understand that, and we have to sort of think creatively about what we can do to improve things. So that was sort of the starting point. And it took about 12 months to go from that sort of initial meeting, that initial idea, to the launch. And when we got to the launch, we've got a website which has got some content on it, and we will continue to put content out, but that's not our main mission to be a space of information, although that will be a place for ideas to be shared, for information to be provided, for debates to be started, but also as the starting platform across social media to provide that space to say, I've seen this use of language, I don't think it's right. What about this? Or this was on the TV the other day and it was really good. Or this is my experience, to provide something that everyone can engage with, everyone can learn from. And I do say that as a lawyer, being, having a very specific experience of that. And we're evolving. So, we are moving. We said at the start of the project that we weren't quite sure exactly where it was going to go. And we wanted it to be a very positive thing. This is about naming and shaming people and saying, you've got that wrong, you're causing further damage. It's about saying, hey, that's not quite right. This is why it's important to get it right. And here's the better use. Or what is a better use of a term, or what's a term that maybe we haven't thought of that could be better. So it's about having those conversations, making people think about the language they use. And I have to say, if that's the only thing that we get out of this, is to get several people thinking more about the language they use, we will have done well. Because in the last 18 months or so, I have been analysing everything I say, and it's made me really, really think, and actually change the way I do a lot of things.
That's impressive. I mean, that I can't even begin to imagine how enormous this task is and where you even start. But I suppose my first question is, can you give us some or an even example of a term that was being used incorrectly within the family law space? I'm putting you on the spot now because I haven't prepared you for this.
I mean, there's lots of examples. The one that sort of immediately springs to my mind, and I say this a lot, is the term custody. And I use that actually now together with a word that's come up a lot, which is visitation. And I think the word custody, we removed it from the law in the early 1990s because it was parent-focused. It suggested a right of control, of ownership, and that's not the right way to approach children law. But also it has associations with criminal law, going into custody, having custody of something, and then people say visitation, and you immediately sort of, you go further down the criminal route and look at prison visitations, and suddenly we're using the same language for that type of world that we're using to assess parents' relationships with their children. And that immediately creates the wrong type of attitude. It's not child focused. It's focused about what the parents want, and and what the child needs gets lost. So I'm finding, but it is prolific, and this highlights another problem that we had, that we get so much media from across the pond in America, where they use this language for that. But I think to say I want you to have someone come say I want full custody is one of the worst things you could say, because that's all about you wanting to have control. It's not thinking about the child at all. But there are many other examples that have come up, and I think another one that bothered me was repeatedly seeing in the media, in mainstream media, using common law marriage and common law spouse, which is so damaging when people start to think that they have these rights and they don't, but they see it and it gets reinforced. And even if you want to use that in the context of talking about a television show from another jurisdiction, you have to put some sort of caveat about that, because this is where people are getting their information from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, those are things I hear all the time, and the custody one. And bearing in mind, I deal with the financial stuff, so this isn't, the children work isn't my area of expertise. But yeah, quite often I'm working with people right at the beginning of their separation, and they'll come in and say, well, I'd like custody, and they can have access every other weekend, and you're like, no. That's not how it works. And it's about winning, and like you say, power and control, and it stops being about actually what a realistic future looks like for the children. So
I think that's right. And it's interesting you to say that from a financial point of view, we sort of took to the possessiveness of having custody. Without coming up with sort of specific words, what comes up a lot when looking at financial matters is the possessiveness that people use. My house, my pension, this is mine, I must keep it, rather than actually, and if you don't start moving away from that language, even without saying, it's not just yours, but just talking about it in a neutral way, you will immediately diffuse that kind of that fear and that control that I think feeds into a lot of the conflict. It's not because people are necessarily trying to be antagonistic. They're scared. There's uncertainty, and so they are already geared for a fight.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, some of the language that surrounds the work that we do definitely kind of leads into that. And I think be interested to know what you feel about, because obviously we've recently had no fault divorce come in, and they've changed the language around decree nisi and decree absolute. Is that something that you think will help matters, or is it not enough of a step?
It's going to help. It's a huge step. It's not going to change everything, but anything that makes the system more accessible and more understandable has to be better. As I say, this is not a system for lawyers. You know, I'm actually quite pleased I don't have to now waste time explaining what decree nisi means, because you know, and you waste time doing it. And you know, I've done a few letters recently with, you know, with the law, and my letters are much shorter, because I'm not having to explain something which I don't. You know, it is obvious you have this conditional order and then you have your final order. I think we also have to keep in mind that language is evolving, and there may come a time when that's not the right language because we've moved on and people, you know, maybe don't even understand conditional. I'm reaching, but the point is, we cannot assume we've got it right. We have to keep checking that it is the right language for this society now, not necessarily the society that drafted the legislation at the time.
Yeah, we might have an emoji or something.
Wow, okay. That's the first time someone has mentioned that when I've been talking about language.
I'm just thinking in terms of, so I have teenage kids, and certainly my son doesn't speak in whole words, certainly written. They're all, you know, it's emojis or like weird spellings of strange things. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Well, I mean, there's something that sorry, I was say weird spelling. I mean, that's something that, you know, coming from a technical point of view, I mean, we were talking a little earlier about FDRs, you know, FDRs and FHDRAs, and actually, you know, I've been sitting in court in cases where they've been talking about PGMs and MUs, and you know, these are people who are sitting in court. People are talking about them, but they don't know because the barristers, the court's gone into their own language. So I think all of that, you know, yes, making sure the language is accessible for the people who need to understand it, but we also got, you know, it has to be usable as well. So it's really interesting sort of hear that comparison. I like the emoji point there. I'm going to remember that one.
I think some of the initials that are used in the law, it's very similar to initials that are used in financial services. But if it's not something you're familiar with on a day-to-day basis, like there are still loads of initials in family law that I have to go and Google when I've been to a meeting with lots of lawyers, because I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what that means. And so, yeah, it's
and we keep coming up with new ones. We do. I mean, that we've recently had the efficiency statements. We've got ES1s and ES2s, and I see information coming out about this, guidance coming out about this for not for lawyers. And ES1, you have to understand that before you can even come to that document. So yeah, we have to be careful.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think we're trying to move to a world, or certainly there are people in the divorce space who are trying to move towards more of a team working, so that we're playing on professional strengths. So we're working with divorce coaches, we're working with financial planners, we're working with all sorts of other professionals in the area rather than just lawyers. And it's great that the lawyers all understand this fantastic jargon that they've got, but if they want to bring other people along with them, then it would be great to have a language that was understandable to all of us as well as to the clients.
And I think it's so important to have that team around you. And I think one thing that I often find myself explaining to clients, I'm a lawyer. I have this very specific role in the breakdown of your relationship, but I am not the only person you're going to need. I'm not there to provide, I'm here for legal advice. I'm sort of almost a tool in that respect. And that's something else that the Language Project is looking at, that helping people understand that having your relationship breakdown doesn't necessarily mean going to a lawyer and then going to court. You have this huge space around you, a huge amount of professionals who are there to help you, and ideally keep you out of court. And actually, you know, lawyers are part of that, but it's not the only thing. And I think understanding that world is that it's much larger than and much more supportive than people think. Will again help sort of diffuse that idea that you've got to prepare for a fight.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you see it so often. I had a new client come work with me a month or so ago, and beforehand she was emailing me and she said, so if I come and work with you, do I not need a lawyer then? I'm like, it's not one or the other. Like, you need me because you need me to help you with this bit of the finances bit, but you need a lawyer because they can give you legal advice that I can't give you. So actually, it's not a one or other situation. It's you need a team of people, each playing to their own strengths around you. And I think if we can talk in those terms also, as well as the language that we use around these things, and not, not I'm going to take her, it's this sort of language, I'm going to take her for every penny that she's got or he's got. Yeah, really? That, how is that going to help anybody? If you've got a co-parent with the other person, if you've got children, probably for the rest of your life, it's not going to be massively helpful if you've decided to go and have a huge battle in court. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. So where are you up to at the moment? Where's the project up to? What are the next steps?
Okay. Well, we've since we launched, we've been doing a lot of work in promoting the project. So there's been a lot of stuff out there in the press, in the legal press. I've been doing lots of interviews, a bit like this, and talking to lots of people, doing lots of writing about it, and basically trying to and getting people to engage with the social media accounts, which is starting to take off. I think our next stage is going to be focused on providing some more content, and particularly some more accessible content. We're looking to do video articles, things that are a bit different, that show things rather than simply telling people things. I think a lot of the time we don't want to put information up that people have to sit and read, because they're not going to. So we're doing things that are visual. We've commissioned some cartoons to try and help literally demonstrate things. I've mentioned the video articles, and then we're hoping to host a training event later in the year. And then we will look to do something for the anniversary of the launch, just to sort of say, right, here's where we're going and here's what the next step will be. And then it's going to be a matter of carrying on, making people aware of the project, getting more and more people engaged in the project. As I said, particularly young people, getting them engaged, getting different perspectives, different views, and just really get people thinking about the language. So I think there'll come a point when we will simply be, we will be sort of, be churning out the material. That's not quite where, that's not what we want to be doing, but regular useful information. Of course, we'll have to react to what happens in the world and family law, and then just keep reminding people that we're here, keep putting language into people's minds so that people keep thinking about it, and hopefully we'll start to see some changes. Yes, any small change on any case for any one person is fantastic. The big picture change we want to be part of. We know that that's a slow process, but we think we can make a difference from a language perspective, and it's just a matter of sort of getting on and making as many people as aware of that as possible.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. The social media accounts that you have and the website that you've got and the videos that you're going to put out there, are they aimed at the general public? Are they aimed at lawyers? Who's the intended audience?
I think this comes down to what I say quite a lot about this project. Everyone has got something to contribute and everyone has got something to learn. And I think anyone from the profession who comes into thinking about language or thinking about what they do, thinking I know what I'm talking about, or I know how to do this job, I know how to talk about stuff, is you're missing something. And if I give sort of a couple of examples, one of the video articles I'm looking to interview a court interpreter, and so that's going to be very enlightening for the profession, but I think also for other people as well. And we're looking to do something on gaslighting, because that's a term that gets used a lot and I think misused quite a bit. And understand where that comes from. We're looking to go back and maybe look right back. Again, we could talk about the case law, and we could talk about everything that you can find. There's plenty of information out there, but what we want to do is sort of show it. So we might try and look at the original play Gaslight and actually understand why we use that term, because I don't know if you're familiar with play, but I don't think there are a few greater examples of coercive, controlling abuse, and how gaslight, making someone think they're going crazy. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for, and I think some of the stuff we put out there will be much more geared to some sectors, to some people, and some to others, and ultimately we'll be looking to put things out there that are accessible to across languages. We'll be putting subtitles on things, so we're trying to keep that in mind, always being aware of we can probably always do better.
That sounds really brilliant. I've come across so many people who have experienced coercive control of in some way, shape or form. And so, yeah, that I didn't know about the play, so I will go and look that.
It's a really good play, and I hope we're able to do it justice in some way. Just to give you a really quick summary. A husband goes looking in another room that his wife doesn't know about for something. And in order to look in that room, he has to turn the gas lights on in there. And it means the gas lights in the rest of the house go dimmer. And she says to him, when you left the house, the gas lights went dimmer. And he says, no, they didn't. You're going crazy. That's really basic, does not do it justice. And there are other bits and pieces about moving things around that, there's a lot more to it than that. But that's basically where that concept comes from.
Oh, I had no idea, but yeah, that makes.
I tried not to give too much about the play away as well.
So. We can all go and watch it. That sounds really good. Something that that's kind of come into my mind while we've been talking is, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but is the use of tools like Family Wizard, in the language that couples are using between themselves, as well as the language that we as professionals use towards two clients to describe things. Is that something that the project's looking at covering as well? The kind of what one party says to their soon-to-be ex?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, we're working with our Family Wizard on various projects. James Evans has very kindly agreed to join our committee and help. So I think you'll probably be seeing a lot more of our Family Wizard and the Family Language project working together going forward. Absolutely, anything we can do to improve that language that they use, whether they're coming from a place that they don't understand something, or that they don't realise that their conflict is having the impact that it's having. And that's something I think that is really all boils down to. We are so much better informed now about the damage that conflict does, that we cannot ignore things that make it worse, such as misuse of language. So yes, anything like our Family Wizard that can help improve that, we're very supportive of.
Excellent. We spoke to James a couple of episodes ago, so if anybody's not heard that and like to go back and find out more about our Family Wizard and how it can help you with the language that you use between one another, then please look that up, because it was a fascinating interview with him. Really good. So that I really like the idea of you're working with our Family Wizard, because I think that I don't understand, can't get my head around how on earth it tells when you're sending you can pick out offensive words, but it seems to know when you're being sarcastic or
saying something. Their tone meter. No, I think that's one of their most interesting projects, and we've sort of glibly talked about how we might translate that and apply that to, say, solicitors' correspondence to identify paragraphs that are unhelpful or that are actually going to increase the conflict of the case, because I think, as I said, once you start looking at even language that you think isn't necessarily, because you're writing to another professional, but you've got to remember that there's a person beyond that professional reading that's going to interpret that in a certain way. I think their tone meter is very interesting. I can't fathom their algorithms or how they've managed that either, but I've seen it in practice. It's quite something.
It would be brilliant if they could apply it to lawyers' letters as well. Because I really have seen, I certainly have examples of clients, lawyers who've received really pretty offensive correspondence from the other side. And like you say, it is you are a person, and actually working with clients who are going through divorce is already quite an emotive position to be in. And I think family lawyers do need looking after, and if there's anything out there that can kind of tone down some of the words, it's not everybody. That's
the thing. How do you tell people how to do their jobs? But I do think it's, and some people will be resistant to it, although I think, when it comes to particularly children work and family law, you have to be really careful about that. There is really no justification for using aggressive language. But one of the things that, I given a lot of thought about again since starting this project is using the the greeting "Dear Sirs." Because for ages I thought, oh, well, it's a bit archaic, but it's it's tradition, it's what everyone uses, and there's not really a suitable alternative. And then one day I sort of looked like, no, there has to be something better. We are not law firms are not groups of men anymore, and this is where that comes from. And once I started thinking about it, I was like, right, okay, well, why don't I find out who the person is I'm writing to? Use their name, even if you're still writing formally, or if you're writing to a law firm, well, use the name of the law firm. And suddenly it's like, well, okay, there are other options out there. And now it actually seems to me, kind of grates when I see "Dear Sirs," because I'm like, it's not appropriate anymore. But how do you then turn around and say, can you not write "Dear Sirs"? We're not a firm of men.
Well,
And
you're
even if
not,
it
and
were, these days it might not be appropriate anyway, because you're making assumptions about how someone wants to be referred to. But it's how
yeah,
to address that. And I think, again, this point in particular, through practice, through using better language and getting as many people to, again, comes back to think about the language that you're using. Once you start thinking about it, you will start to notice that actually I didn't need to say that, or maybe there's a better way of saying that. And if someone else is thinking about it, it feeds back and you'll see it, and sort of making change happen that way rather than saying you should have done this differently.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that that's so interesting about the Dear Sirs, because there are not a huge number of, it's largely women who are family lawyers, is certainly what I found. There are male family lawyers, but there's a huge proportion of women. So actually Dear Sirs is really kind of not appropriate in when you're writing in that situation. It is really strange. It reminds me, I had a message on LinkedIn the other day, and from somebody that I don't know, and it, bless them, it was somebody congratulating me on something, but they'd written "Dear Mrs. Caine," and I'm like, right, I'm not a Mrs. But you've automatically looked at my profile and assumed that that's why. And I was like, if he'd written "Dear Tamsin," I'd have been like, no worries, that's absolutely fine. And maybe people don't like to have their first name used, but it really grated on me. And I was like, well, I know this person's trying to be polite, but actually, we are in a different world now. We very rarely get referred to as by our surname and and Ms, Mrs, Miss, whatever. It's only really in schools
Well,
and perhaps
and I
in the
think
courtroom.
but also I think it comes down to this idea of what makes you comfortable. How do you want to be referred to
Yeah,
in this courtroom? Because again, you're not alienating people, you're not making assumptions about them. And would it really be that difficult at the start of a case to ask the other side to, ask in the courtroom, do you mind if I, use mother, father, or rather than, making the assumptions and potentially alienating people. And we talk about, so and so versus this, but you could have a completely different way of doing it. That doesn't put people against each other, but also makes them understand who they are, who everyone is in the room, and that they're being referred to in a way that's comfortable. I think that would be a much better system than making doing it so formally and setting all these things out and maybe jumping and making those assumptions, and people feeling they have to fit into them or sit there and be quiet or be referred to as the the maternal grandma, the MGM, or something like that, because that's what's done.
yeah, no, absolutely. Do you know what? I'd never even thought of the versus thing.
Oh
Which
goodness, yeah.
brought up Kramer versus Kramer, which you're probably too young to remember, but it's when I was like, my mum loved that film, and that was a proper court battle, divorce, and that is, you go for, you think in terms of cases being somebody versus somebody. It's like a boxing ring, isn't it? And you straight away pull in the language conflict in, aren't
you
you?
think about the language we use, we call court battles. You said boxing ring. People talk about barristers having them in your corner. It's
Yeah,
fighting language,
it is.
and it reinforces that idea that you have to fight. Otherwise, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. You're going to lose that control. You're not going to get a good settlement. You're not going to have access to the abuse access. You're going to see your children as much. And people, particularly when by the time they've got to a lawyer, they're already so far down that path. You have to talk them back, and often a lot of the damage is done. But if you think about the battle language, fighting language.
Yeah.
It is prolific throughout the way we talk about law and family law. And family law, I think, has to be seen differently from other areas of law, because the end goals, the solutions that we're looking for are about families, about children, about society. They're not about winning, getting paid. And if we make people feel that way, it's, you're going to carry on that antagonistic feeling. And we just need to think, hey, this is an area of law. We need the law. We have to have some technical language, and that's why we're the Family Law Language Project.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do things in such a way that makes that process worse, or that is necessarily the same way as every other practice area of law does things.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. That's so fascinating. I can't believe that we've been talking for so long. But really interesting. For anybody listening who's interested in finding out more about the project, or finding the project on social media and following it, could you just give us where they can find you?
Absolutely. So the website is a little bit long, but it's easy to remember. It's the familylawlanguageproject.co.uk. And our Twitter is at the FLL Project. And if you put Family Law Language Project into Instagram, we'll pop up. We've got a really distinctive logo, which is colourful building blocks with the name of the project. So we do stand out. And once you've found it, you'll find us across everything else.
Excellent, that's fantastic, and we'll put that in the show notes as well, so that hopefully people will just be able to click on that and find you straight away. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been really interesting to talk to you, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully the project surging forward and reducing conflict in family law.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Pleasure.